Hereby, I open this academic ceremony in which Liyang Wu will defend the academic thesis More Than Daydreaming, the cross-cultural comparison and application of the best possible self-intervention. May I invite you to present a summary of your study and the conclusions of your thesis.
Highly esteemed proctor, highly esteemed opponents, dear supervisors, colleagues, families, and friends, thanks for being here today. In the next 15 minutes, I would like to present an overview of the research I have done in the last 4 years, with a title named More Than Daydreaming, the Cross-Cultural Comparison and Application of the Best Possible Self-Intervention. First, I would like to ask of you to close your eyes for a moment. Now, please picture something in your mind. Imagine that you are living in a place you love, spending time with the people you cherish. You have the inner strength you desire, whether it's independence, intelligence, or resilience. You are living the life you have always dreamed of. You have become the person you want to be. This is your best possible self. Thanks. Now please open your eyes. How does that feel? It's like daydreaming, something we did a lot in childhood, but gradually stopped as we grew older. This is the topic I want to share with you today, the best possible self-intervention, a positive psychological intervention method, but as I mentioned in the title, it's more than just a daydreaming. Positive psychology is a new branch of psychological research emerged in the beginning of the new century, focusing on the flourishing of human strengths and positive aspects. One of the many ways to apply the positive psychology in daily life is positive psychological interventions. The family of it is a big one. We have the well-known mindfulness or meditation, teaching us to feel the world. We have the gratitude writing, which encourages people to give love back to those who love us. We have self-compassion, teaching us to be compassionate about ourselves. We also have some interventions aimed at making people more optimistic, and the BPS is a part of this branch. In the formal intervention, the practitioners will first have a preparation for 1 minute and then write about their best possible selves for 50 minutes, and then have a 5 minutes imagination based on their writing afterward. Previous studies support the effectiveness of the BPS intervention on different outcomes, including psychological, physical, and others. But if we look at all the studies have been done now, it is clear that most evidence comes from Western countries. Therefore, it raised the question regarding the suitability of the BPS intervention in samples from the Eastern culture background. Culture is a very broad concept, and there are many ways to define and compare it. The most well-known example here is the distinction between collectivism and individualism. Collectivism emphasizes the interest of the community and harmony of the group, encouraging cooperation, shared responsibilities, and the well-being of the collective over individual desires. In contrast, individualism prioritizes personal feelings and self-development, valuing independence, personal achievement, and the right to make autonomous decisions based on individual needs and aspirations. Of course, there was no term can be used to cover all the cultural diversity, but it's important to remember that there is no good or bad in their differences. However, in specific situations, they may somehow have certain influence. For example, in the BPS intervention, as the writing task focuses on self, being collectivistic might not be a good idea. On contrast, being more individualistic may be more aligned with the core idea of the BPS intervention. For the future application of the BPS in Eastern society, it is important to have the empirical evidence supporting its effectiveness, and it takes direct comparison to find out if the cultural sensitivity of the BPS exists. In our first study, we started from a single session of the BPS to examine its immediate effects at the beginning of this research line. The first study was conducted online. Participants from China mainland were randomly assigned to either the BPS condition or control condition. In the control condition, participants were required to finish a neutral writing task about their typical days. The results support the effectiveness of the BPS in reducing state anxiety, state depression, and negative future expectations. However, we noticed that our findings were not consistent with previous studies. Several meta-analyses support a robust effect of the BPS on positive effect and positive future expectations, but these effects were not present in our study. In addition, similar results have been observed from studies conducted in Singapore, and which is another country with an Eastern cultural background. This made us to wonder whether the BPS be equally effective across Eastern and Western countries, and led us to the second study. The second study was also conducted online. In this study, we recruited participants from both China and the Netherlands. This time, we extended our intervention from one single session to 3 sessions over 1 week. Participants were measured immediately after the first session to examine the immediate effect, and 1 day after the last session to examine the short-term effect. Let's first look at the effect within each culture separately. Among Chinese participants, significant changes were reported on state depression, positive future expectations, and goal ambivalence, but only after all 3 sessions. In contrast, among Dutch participants, the effects of the BPS were observed immediately, leading to improvements in positive effects, positive future expectations, goal clarity, and goal ambivalence. And also after 3 sessions, significant changes were still reported on positive and negative future expectations, goal ambivalence, and trait optimism. At first glance, these results suggest that the BPS works better in Dutch sample. A direct comparison further supports this. We found that the BPS was more effective in Dutch sample on positive effect, trait optimism, and life satisfaction. So now, why would the BPS be more effective in one culture and less in another one? We initially attempted to identify psychological mechanisms, but we failed. So we shifted our focus to analyzing the content of the participants' writings. There was no restriction on what to write, and our participants have all the freedom they need to express themselves. Participants usually wrote about their health, education, and career. They want to have material to support a high-quality life. They want to have romantic relationships with someone they love, have babies or pets, or anything being meaningful to them. Someone wrote positively, someone not. Someone wrote shorter, someone longer. So we want to know if these diversities in the narrative content will contribute to the differences of the effectiveness of the BPS. First, we compared the content across culture from the perspective of different domains. We found that Chinese participants wrote less in most domains compared to the Dutch, especially in areas such as family, social life, and health. This suggests that Chinese participants may not have been as committed to Dutch person, and Dutch participants reported greater benefits after writing about several domains, such as health, education, and personal growth. However, for Chinese participants, they only benefited more from writing about health. Additionally, Dutch participants used more positive words in their writings. We also found that beyond content, the way people wrote about stories also matters. Chinese participants used more past-oriented words. Simply put, they often referenced to the past when looking at the future, and they benefited from this. The more past-oriented words they used, the larger the effectiveness would be. For the Dutch participants, in contrast, they used more present-oriented words, but they only experienced great benefit when using more future-oriented words. These results partly answered our question about cultural differences, but the value of the BPS is more than just being an intervention method. It is also a useful manipulation tool in the lab for studying optimism. For a long time, optimism has been regarded as a personal trait, meaning that only the correlations between optimism and other variables could be found. But with the BPS intervention, we were able to examine the correlationship from optimism to other variables. In our first study, we aimed to explore the application by investigating the correlationship between optimism and the placebo and nocebo effect. The placebo and nocebo effect refers to the improvement or worsening of clinical symptoms when individuals receive an inert substance. Holding positive or negative expectations were regarded as one of the most important mechanisms underlying the placebo and nocebo effect. And many studies suggested great optimism was associated with stronger placebo effect or weaker nocebo effect. However, it remains unclear whether optimism has a direct impact on it, or if other underlying mechanisms exist or not. In this study, we first guided participants through a conditioning part. They received a series of painful stimuli, where a high pain stimuli was consistently paired with the color of purple, and the low pain stimuli were paired with the color of yellow. In this way, we induced the placebo and nocebo effect from them. After that, participants completed either the BPS task or a neutral rating task, followed by a testing phase to examine their responses to the same stimuli as before. In this study, we observed successful BPS manipulation, meaning that participants became more optimistic after the writing task. And we also successfully induced the placebo and nocebo effect. As expected, participants rated the same stimuli significantly higher or lower after seeing the corresponding signal. However, there was no effect was found based on the rating condition. These findings led us to question how expectations function in the process of the placebo and the nocebo effect. Although the significant role of expectations has been well acknowledged, we may need to distinguish the differences between general expectations and pen-specific expectations, especially in the process of placebo and nocebo effect. And here comes the conclusion part. First, the BPS could be effective in Chinese population after both single and multiple sessions, with more pronounced effect for negative outcomes. And second, the effectiveness of the BPS in Chinese sample was found to be lower compared to the Dutch ones. Third is the difference in the narrative content may contribute to the cultural diversity of the effectiveness from the BPS. And fourth, we could further use the application of the BPS in the lab for the detecting for causality from optimism, but the general expectations should be distinguished from the specific expectations. Thanks for your attention now. I give the floor back to the proctor.
Thank you very much for your presentation. The opposition will be opened by Professor Peter Muris, Professor of Developmental Psychopathology at Maastricht University. He is also the chair of the assessment committee.
Thank you, Madam the Pro-Rector. Dear candidate, I've read your thesis. I have to give you a lot of compliments for the work. I see that a number of papers are already published or accepted, and I'm sure that the other papers will follow. I also want to congratulate the team for this nice thesis, and apparently you have worked good together and you ended up with this very nice research. But of course I have also a critical question for you. And that question is concerned with, well, I give you an example. I'm also working 1 day per week, I work in the clinic. And I work with children and adolescents with a variety of problems, but now we had a group of 5 youngsters. They were, I think, in the age of 18 to 23 or something like that. And we decided maybe for these youngsters, there were a lot of mood problems, but they had also autism. And we decided, okay, let's do some things from the positive psychology. That's good. To do, like, for example, to do ACT exercises. So to teach them to be mindful. That was one thing. We had elements of self-compassion that you also illustrate in your presentation. And we had also a sort of diffusion, meaning that you look at the problems from distance and you try to not to get fused with the problem, but look at the distance and maybe get a more calm attitude. But surprisingly, it didn't go well with 2 of the youngsters in the treatment. We were also surprised by this because they were really frustrated by these exercises. They were upset, they were distressed, and it was like, I cannot do this, and we had to abort the session because they were really like, it was too far away for them. So my question then, if this best positive self-intervention, if you would apply that to, for example, a depressed patient, maybe you get the same picture. Because imagine a really depressed person who wants to do the best positive self, but so depressed he cannot imagine anymore that there are positive things in life. So maybe you get the same distress and well, the same distress reaction than have witnessed in my clients with the intervention. So it's my question in a nutshell then is this really an intervention that you would use in a clinical population?
Highly esteemed opponent, thanks for the question. Actually, I thought about this question from another perspective. I know there's a theory called self-discrepancy theory, which means you have a different version of self, and one of them is the actual self, which means the you. And there's another self called ideal self, which means the one you want to be. And according to this theory, if there is some discrepancy between the ideal self and your true self, then you feel motivated because you feel like the gap is not big enough, it's reachable. So you have the power you need to pursue to that goal. But if the discrepancy is too large, you feel like this ideal self you want to be is too far away to reach, then you just lose the confidence. You just become sad, you become unmotivated. So back to the question, I guess for the clinical person, it really depends on, their actual situations. Because for someone, even if they are, clinically ill or have some clinical problems or symptoms, but maybe it's still possible for them to use this strategy because for them, the problem happens not on certain parts that would make them disappointed on themselves or lose the confidence on themselves. For example, someone are just anxiety, someone are not nervous, and maybe someone are just cannot control themselves. And for some symptoms, this can happen. Okay. And for this kind of symptoms, the BPS might be useful. But as you mentioned, if someone are already depressed and already in a very low mood, and then actually I would recommend to leave out the positive psychological interventions for now and deal with the symptoms first to help them get better first from minus to zero, and after that then we can find some strategy to help them to move from zero to plus to more. And I think that will be a more balanced strategy to take care of both the symptoms and the potential growth after that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and do you have advice for me how to see as a clinician what patients should I do the strategy and what patients I should not do this technique? Is there a rule or something that you can think of? It's an open question. I'm not.
I do have some ideas about that.
Okay, that's good.
I guess actually this PPS, like I mentioned, is like a daydreaming. Why would I say that? Because it's something we did a lot when we were young, when we were kind of naive maybe. But it's something born with us. It's not like some strategy has to be taught by someone. We do it ourselves. And also for some, like you mentioned, patients, some patients are also a dreamer. They may be patients or they may currently suffer from some symptoms, but they still have the inner desire to look at the future, to become a better self. And I guess that is obvious for them. You can, detect it from the daily conversation from them, because you can see someone is positive and someone is not. So I guess it's maybe a good idea to start with someone who already positive And then it's a good foundation to encourage them to do more about this kind of practice, to be more optimistic. Also, we cannot just give up hope for those who are not optimistic. We could find some other ways like mindfulness or self-compassion to help them to first get peace with themselves, to totally, well, enter some stage they can build the strength from that, and gradually to become the next, or to enter the next stage where the true optimism can be cultivated. So like one by one.
Okay, thank you. I'm satisfied. Thanks.
Okay. The opposition will be continued by Professor Ernst Bohlmeier, Professor of Mental Health Promotion at Universiteit Twente, and he will be present online.
Dear candidate, I share the compliments of my, this is the questionnaire before. I think it's a very, in general, well-written thesis, dissertation. I think the cross-cultural perspective is very relevant, very important, I think, and you've done some groundbreaking work in that respect, and then also on placebo, nocebo, quite innovative. So, I was quite impressed with your work. But I'm here mainly to also think about some critical questions. And what I find interesting is that your first study that you described in chapter 2 took place during the COVID-19 pandemic. So that's a challenge. So you have to adapt, you have to react quite quickly, you have to change from the laboratory to the online. So that's a challenge. So these questions are more in hindsight. And I wondered, I can imagine, especially for young adults, it was such an overwhelming time that it's very hard to think about a future. And again, and that all is well, and you are functioning in your sort of best way again. But I wondered, did you consider changing the intervention, the instruction a little bit, so that there was some room for distress at first, before going to the best self? So taking into account that it is a difficult time, did you consider, in hindsight, would you consider adapting the intervention a little bit in the context of such a challenging time as the pandemic?
Highly esteemed opponent, thanks for the question. The simple answer is no, not yet. We thought about to change the instruction for certain situations, but not as the first study in this simple, because we worried if we changed the instruction, maybe it will misguide the following researchers, because in this way it will be a bit harder to compare our effectiveness or our results from what happens next or from the following up studies. And also, yes, it's under the pandemic area, so there was some trouble. But the BPS intervention is a quite freestyle intervention, so it only gives you a brief instruction, and it does not to really restrict the contents you need to write. Like I mentioned in my slides, also the follow-up studies, people have the freedom they need to express themselves, and we believe this freedom is important for this intervention, because not everyone have the same feeling or have the same outlook of the future. For example, if we give them a certain guideline to think about that from the pandemic background, what do you want to do after the COVID-19? And this may trigger certain parts of their memories or their life. For example, if someone got a deeper influence from the pandemic and someone not, then this instruction would make a difference between these two persons. This kind of the concern. So that's why we choose to use the original version as the first study.
Yes, because another strategy could be that, especially in such explorative context, you could also, so you went to a randomized controlled trial, and I can see why you do that, because, but you could also do a more explorative study first, to try the intervention out with a small group and to really try to understand how is this optimal, do we need changes? It's a different approach that you first do a non-controlled study, more like an acceptability study, a feasibility study, where you explore the optimal benefits you can make, and then when you feel, okay, we may need to do some changes, and then go to a randomized controlled trial. Would you consider that in the future or in hindsight as a good strategy academically, or?
That's definitely a good idea to have a little pilot before using it. Actually, we thought about that in the second study, but in the second study, especially at the beginning, it's still the pandemic area. So actually, based on the same concern, we decided to use the original version, but we did consider the possible influence from this certain background. So we added some question about how do you think the pandemic influence you? How do you think the severity of it? As a control variable, because we also want to know if people are getting different levels of influence from this situation, and also we want to know whether its influence will have a further influence on the effectiveness we want to detect. And also, yes, if we want to do a further study, especially in this new area, past pandemic, then it's possible our results in the pandemic background are not be easily to be replicated. So we will consider maybe to add a certain restrict to let them maybe as a reminder of the previous time. So in this way, we can balance the influence from the situation and also to keep it in a controllable range, and let our findings be more comparable with the research in the future, and also to let the results be more easily be generalized to more populations.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. That's some good suggestions. Do I have time for one more question, Madam President?
Unfortunately, we are running out of time, so I would suggest that when we have another round, you can keep this question, maybe?
I'll leave it here then. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
The opposition will be continued by another external guest, Dr. Kaya Peerdeman, who is an assistant professor of health and medical psychology at Leiden University.
Yes, thank you. Well, dear candidate, I would like to switch to the chapter on placebo and nocebo effects, where you use the best possible self-intervention to try to see whether people who are more optimistic show larger placebo or then maybe also smaller nocebo effects. And I have a few methodological questions here. I think one thing that came to my mind is that the best possible self, you really see it as an induction of optimism. And I know it's been used and seen and studied as such, and also been shown to affect optimism. But then also it's been shown to affect other outcomes, like positive or negative effects. So I was wondering in that respect, if you think, the study can really tell you whether optimism affects placebo and nocebo effects, or whether we should take a little bit more with a grain of salt. And I was wondering, next to that, why you chose to do this intervention after the conditioning procedure, so after really teaching people what to expect with certain cues. Could you elaborate on that?
Esteemed opponents, if I understand the question correctly, want me to explain why we put the intervention phase in front of the conditioning phase or after the conditioning phase, right?
Nothing, yeah.
Yeah. We had this concern when we were designing the study. I mean, for now, I guess I need to refresh myself a little bit. What do we do now is to first let the participants do the practice or do the conditioning, and after that we give them the practice, the BPS manipulation. And let's think about the other way. If we first let them to do the intervention, to give them the manipulation of the optimism, and after we give them the conditioning parts, then it's possible that the elevated level of optimism may influence the effect from the conditioning, because there was also evidence support the optimism level will influence the pain sensitivity of people. So that's why we choose to first let them to do the conditioning, and then we give them manipulation, because we guess it's only about a guess. We guess the effects from the conditioning could somehow be more reliable, especially in a lab environment. Of course, that will raise the question like this, because you may be wondering why we choose to use this sequence, because this sequence also causes some other problems, like if we choose to put the manipulation after the conditioning, then the optimism manipulation may interplay or influence the effect from the conditioning, or in worst cases, the conditioning effect may fade away because of this very long conditioning, very long practice. But after a careful consideration, we think in this sequence we may be able to get a more reliable placebo effect compared to another way. So it's like the balance between them.
So if you would do it again, would you choose the same order? Because I would also imagine that it's really the learning that you want to be affecting, right? If the learning is part of, well, really what determines the placebo or nocebo effects. So would you still take the same approach if you would do the study again?
Actually, we are doing this again in a second study. It's not in the thesis, but we are doing a following-up study based on this one. We changed our strategy from a similar concern, especially about the sequence. So in the new study we are currently doing, what we are used to now is to split the intervention part from a long 15 minutes to two brief ones, each lasts only for 5 minutes. We think by doing this way, we could shorten the time people spend on the writing. And also, in each testing part, we have 2 testing parts after 2 writing intervention parts. In each testing part, we will have separate or actual stimuli as refreshing stimuli to help them build or strengthen the conditioning effect again. So we hope in this way we could somehow overcome the barriers or shortcomings from our first study, and then help the participants to remain or to restore this conditioning effects till the end of the experiment. But it's only a study we are still running, so we haven't got any result to share. But we hope to find out some interesting result from that.
Yeah, and I'm also curious that you indicate or you have the design in which you condition placebo effects and you have a test phase. And I noticed that design is somewhat different than what you often see in the placebo literature. The one thing is that you only used cues. Well, often in the placebo literature, there's also some kind of a fake treatment. In this case, it might be, for example, a sham electronic device. And I also have my doubts about that, because then you in a way have two CS pluses or two CS minuses, so that can also get a bit complicated. But I was wondering what your logic was in deviating from that, what we often see in that respect, and also in how you incorporate the moderate pain stimulus, because very often you already have that during the learning phase, but then associated with, for example, moderate pain. So what was your logic to deviate? And do you think this is then really an improvement, or in what respects do you consider this an improvement from what we often see?
I'm sorry, could you repeat part of the question again?
Yeah, so what I noticed is that the design you used for inducing placebo and nocebo effects, for testing them, is not in every detail in the same as what we often see in the literature, in the placebo and nocebo literature, right? So very often we have an actual fake treatment that we use in the learning and test phases, and often also the moderate intensity stimulus, so the one that's kind of control or neutral, how you want to call that, is already also provided during the learning phase. So you have a control cue and controlled trials, really. And I wondered why you deviated from this, and if you think that's an improvement, or how you think that's an improvement.
We thought about to use
inert.
Sorry. We thought about to use.
You may briefly answer this question.
We thought about to use an inert substance, and but we also found some evidence to support a conditioning effect, or the placebo effect, placebo or nocebo effect without a substance, but with only signals. And based on our studies, we feel like if we use a real substance on the participants, then it'd be a bit harder for them to go through the following manipulation part, because this is the part we want to add in for detecting the effect from the optimism. So that's why we choose to use this data and only use the signal and the verbal suggestion to induce the placebo and nocebo effect.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Peerman, you are satisfied with the answer?
Yes.
Thank you. The opposition will now be continued by Dr. Nicole Geschwind, and she is Assistant Professor of Clinical Psychological Science at our university, Maastricht University.
Okay. Dear candidate, dear Liyang, congratulations on your well-written and inspiring thesis, also to your supervisors. Your thesis is coherent, and it's a well-written work that examines the applicability of the best possible self in both the Dutch and the Chinese context, and compares its effects. So my question regards chapter 4, different futures, different presents, which combines quantitative with qualitative analysis. And there you write in your conclusion that the beneficial role of being past-oriented in the Chinese participants indicates that envisioning the future in the context of the past, instead of directly focusing on the future, may be more compatible with the Chinese culture. So you suggest maybe adding a new sentence to the instruction, such as think about your best possible self based on your experience. And I was thinking, I can see where you're coming from. You're choosing the middle path, right? Combining the best possible self about the future with something from the past. But I was thinking there are also two other options, which I think maybe you didn't consider, or maybe you have. And so I think option number one is to say, well, maybe they don't think so much or so often about the future yet. Maybe they just need a bit more explicit prompting, a bit more training about how to think about their future in a way that is more specific, more detailed, more fun, more vivid, more about what they want to be, what gives them joy, what, not what they should be, but what would be ideal for them. But they might need more training. Alternatively, one could say, well, I'm not so sure whether this is the right approach for the Chinese culture. Let's go with a different exercise, one that focuses on the past. For example, gratitude, reflecting on things that helped you in your life, how you're grateful for that, and how you can make those people proud, or how you can make more of that. So I wonder how you think about that, and how you could find out which way works best if I gave you money to do a study and to answer this empirically. So 2 parts: first your opinion, and the second part, how could you study that scientifically?
That's the important. If I understand it correctly, there are 2 ways possible. First is to train them to do the PPS better. Another one is to choose another option instead of PPS intervention, right?
Actually, three options, right? One you suggest, namely, we just do the best possible self, but we tell them, take along your past history.
Yes. Sorry.
And then we have the option, like, no, we don't look at past history, but we teach them to look at their future in a different way, give them more prompts. Or we say, we just go for past experience and reflection based on that.
The basic idea of doing the study is based on assumption that people who are going to use these intervention methods are those without training or prior experience. So that's the whole idea of the positive psychology, to cover a more general population compared to the traditional psychology. So yes, we could give them more a pre-training before we want them to finish this task. But this will be an extra burden for those who want to be a practitioner of this intervention. Of course, it will definitely lead to a better result, because you have someone guide you to do it correctly and to do it like more frequently. Like in some studies, this PPS is not a self-test or self-intervention. It was guided by someone in a lab or in a classroom to do it in form of group. And they do find somewhat a better effectiveness from here. But I was thinking, if we do it, of course we could do it, then what should participants do when they are alone?
Sorry, when they are?
When they are alone by themselves, without the guide. So that's why we choose to stick to the self-help format, to let them to be able to do it even by themselves. So I guess that can answer why we do not give them a pre-training before that. And also for the first option, like I mentioned in the thesis, to let them write it from the past. I have to admit it's a very general idea, because that's from the result we found like writing more past-oriented words will lead to a higher effectiveness. But actually, it's easy to think that, but it's more difficult to really do that, because it's hard to define what does that mean to write from your past, because we all have different past. Someone may have a very a bright past, or some past experience need or worth to be remembered, but someone may have not that a good childhood. For someone, referring to the past may be a traumatic experience. So I was doubted after I wrote about this idea, because I also believe it's not something we could apply to everyone. And as for another option to just looking at the past but from other format like gratitude, it is of course possible, but also depends on the personal situation. So if I conclude from all my answers and also my thesis, I would say it's most important to think about it from individual perspective, because we all have different life and we all have different future outlook. So if we could find some intervention methods that apply to ourselves to be able to tailor it based on our own characteristics or experience, then it would be the best option. Like not only for BPS, but also for many other psychological interventions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for this answer. You mentioned several aspects that I hadn't yet thought about, such as the applicability in the self-help context, but you also suggest that how nice it would be if we had some kind of personalized, not medicine, but personalized self-help that we can tailor to people's strengths. And so maybe following up on like the different options, asking people to create their future through the best possible self versus reflecting on the past through gratitude interventions. Do you know of any research that compares those two forms?
Yeah, I do know. Actually, the first study about BPS is a study to compare the effectiveness of this BPF intervention with the gratitude intervention.
Mm-hmm.
And also they did a comparison in the same study between the BPS and the expressive writing, so which is another form of writing task. And they found these three levels or three formats of intervention had a similar effect from each other. Of course, the personal experience definitely be different, but generally they have the same level of the effectiveness. And after that, we choose our researchers choose the BPS intervention because it was not harmful to those with traumatic experience. So that's the idea. And as for the comparison between the BPS intervention and the gratitude, they have this kind of comparison has been replicated for several times. And I would not say every one of them, but almost all the studies revealed the similar effect from these two options. So I guess it's really about the personal choice, because someone prefers this and someone prefers that. So if I would recommend to a person who wants to use some positive psychological interventions, I would first ask, what do you like? What do you like? Do you like to show yourself or express yourself how grateful you are? Or do you want to be optimistic about the future, to have a outlook of what is going to happen for tomorrow? So let's do some personal tailoring before we could give advice.
Okay, so thank you for your answers. Given time, I'll stop asking questions here. I'm really satisfied with your answers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the opposition will be continued by Professor Frank Peters, who is an emeritus professor of clinical psychology at our university, Maastricht University.
Thank you, Pro-Rector. Dear candidate, my compliments with the nice work that you've done. Very interesting work, cross-cultural work. Also my compliments to the supervisors with this work. And I also want to compliment you on the choice of your cover. And compliments to the one who designed it, Wengxin Liu. I know if he or she is here.
Thanks. Yeah, well, she's my girlfriend. She's watching online.
She
so
is, yes.
Thanks to...
Well, compliments to your girlfriend, because how funny it is to put tulips in the arms of a panda bear, and also on the cover you're trying to merge these two cultures. Yeah. Really a nice illustration of the work that you've done, so compliments on that. And I've read the thesis with great pleasure, but I also had a lot of questions, but I want to return to the question and the discussion with Professor Mures, because you said something which triggered me, and I thought, okay, I'm going to start with that and just skip my questions for the moment. Because you said, Professor Mures said something about the clinical application of this intervention and said, well, it didn't work so well in some of my patients. And then you said, as a final answer, perhaps we should not apply positive psychology interventions in severely depressed people. But that it is at odds with quite some literature, because we know mindfulness-based therapy works for depression, even in treatment-resistant depression. ACT, Acceptance and Commitment Therapy, works. And Dr. Geschwind and myself have published on a trial with positive cognitive therapy for depression. We carried that out here in Maastricht, which was also very successful, and at least comparable to conventional cognitive therapy. So could you explain this discrepancy? Because you said we should not do it in a clinical population. And I don't agree with that.
Highly esteemed opponent, yes, I would like to make some detailed answer about that.
Okay.
Because, as mentioned by Professor Muris, it's not like everyone reluctant to use this. Like also, Professor Muris mentioned it's only 4 or 5 patients reported to have the bad experience from this positive psychological intervention like mindfulness. So what I really recommend is to ask them before that or to tell whether this person are suitable for the positive psychological intervention, or based on his or her situation, whether it should be a priority to first deal with the real problem. I'm not saying like the positive psychological intervention is not be able to be used for dealing with the problem, but there are a lot of different type of problems.
Okay. So, well, then I have a follow-up question, because you mentioned something about personalizing interventions in response to Dr. Geschwind, and you repeat that now. So how would you, I was a clinician, so what would you recommend for me how to assess if a patient is suitable for this type of intervention? How should I do that?
I think this assessment should be mutual, should be depends both on the patient's perspective and also the professional's perspective, like the clinician's experience.
But I have no clue, so what should I trust the preference of my patient?
No, you should never trust, you should never only trust the patient. I mean, it's not like you should not trust the patient, but we cannot just give them what they want, because as a clinician, we have the responsibility to take care of them. That's why we should really examine or evaluate their preference and give them something we believe suitable for them, and they also willing to accept. It's like to give patients some medicine. It's not something we could give them based on their preference. It's not like, okay, I want this medicine, please give me this. No, we should first evaluate whether the thing they want is benefit for them. I guess it's also the same for the psychological intervention. I mean, we should decide on which types of intervention based on first their experience, or their preference, and second on the suitability of this type.
But the problem is we don't know in advance which treatment is effective in whom. We don't know. Everybody would like to know to make better indication, and we also know that preference of patients is not really very important for effectiveness of treatment. It may be perhaps relevant for dropout, because they drop out of treatment if they don't like it, but the effectiveness isn't really influenced by preference. Okay, if we start thinking about application in a clinical population or in your Chinese population, you state somewhere in the introduction that the BPS intervention is probably something you should do only once, twice, not too much, because the effect doesn't add to it if you repeat it, and it might even diminish the effect. That's what you state somewhere in the introduction of your thesis. But then on page 103, you say something about immediate and short-term effects, and then you state that it might be more beneficial for Chinese respondents to repeat the intervention, which seems to contradict what you say about effectiveness in the introduction. So I wonder, could you explain why you think that repetition of the intervention is better in Chinese students, as you state that repetition is probably not better in general?
I have to say the result I mentioned in the introduction is based on the general findings from previous studies, which are mostly from the Western culture.
Yeah.
And these findings in the Chinese sample are based on the results from our new study. So that's why there is inconsistency. But I would say this need to be further replicated to determine whether it's really.
Roma asked.
You may briefly end your sentence to this question.
I would say it requires further evidence to really help us to determine what is the best dosage for making this intervention effective. But I do agree, sometimes this inconsistency needs to be paid attention because it is very important for the future studies.
Okay, thank you for your answer, and thank you, Prorector, for giving some extra time.
Yeah. Thank you. Liyang Wu, the time appointed for defending your thesis has passed, and the degree committee will now withdraw to discuss the quality of your thesis and your defense. I request that you and your company await the results of our deliberations and our return in this room.
The PhD defense has now ended. The degree committee will debate the candidate's performance behind closed doors. This process usually takes about 10 minutes.
Long road to the south side, 7 miles in my rearview mirror. I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer. East side to the west side. No place like home. If it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. I know what's on the line. I know you know that I can't read your mind. Years can't fly by now, don't waste all your time. Cause I'll go the extra mile. Long road to the south side, 7 miles in my rearview mirror. I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer. East side to the west side. No place like home. If it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. On the dash, got my laces tied. Long road, I don't waste no time. Break rules because fate decides. With the team and we chase the light. I make a move, fall down, shake it off. I hate to lose, bad branch, break it off. No room for negativity, praise and love. Prepare for deep part cause we're taking off. Get the mileage, traveling so far from home. Gathering knowledge, other connections. I put the time in to get everything I ever hoped for. It's a challenge and we all in. It's a better future that we go for. Even though these nights seem long, I know that I am never on my own. Know you won the battle once you've grown. South side, 7 miles in my rearview mirror. I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer. East side to the west side. No place like home. If it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. Long road to the south side, 7 miles in my rearview mirror. I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer. East side to the west side. No place like home. If it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. Years can't fly by now, don't waste all your time. Cause I'll go the extra mile.
sure if they can see the
Liyang Wu, the degree committee here present has assessed the quality of your thesis and your defense. In view of its positive verdict and taking into account your previous qualifications, the degree committee has decided to grant you the degree of doctor. Professor Peters is authorized to confer upon you this academic distinction in accordance with Dutch university custom. I invite your supervisor to now take the floor.
Please all rise.
Do you promise to work in accordance with the principles of scientific integrity at all times, to be careful and honest, transparent, independent, and responsible?
Yes, I promise.
By the authority invested in us by law and in conformity with the decision of the committee here present, I hereby confer upon you, Liyang Wu, the degree of doctor and grant you all the rights attached to by custom and law. And as evidence of this, I now present you with the degree certificate signed by the rector, the secretary, and the other members of the committee, and affixed with the official seal of the university.
And your co-promoter will now speak the laudatio.
Dear Liyang, dear Dr. Wu, it's an honor and a pleasure to stand before you on this special day and to give you this laudation, also on behalf of your promoter, Madelon Peters. And of course, I would like to start by asking you and everyone here and at home to close your eyes for a moment. Imagine it's the year 2021. You are a Chinese student of 25 years old who has been preparing for about a year to go to Maastricht to do research. Now the moment has come to start your adventure. The world is suffering from the corona crisis. When you arrive in Maastricht, you have to quarantine yourself in your guest house for 14 days to meet your co-promoter afterwards for a sad tour in an almost empty university building. In the upcoming weeks, you also work mainly from the guest house, often meeting your supervisors on Skype while being about 8,000 kilometers away from home. Okay, you may now open your eyes again. I wonder what it was like for everyone to imagine the situation, and back then I have often wondered what it was like for you, Liyang. It must have felt strange and lonely at times, but to my surprise, you were very grateful for our Skype meetings. You enjoyed going to the market, one of the few things you were allowed to do during your quarantine, and you mentioned that you loved the bread and sweets here, as well as the weather. And at that moment, I knew that Madelon and I could not have asked for a better candidate for this positive psychology project than you. Little did I know that over the next few years, we would find many more reasons to support this claim. The first thing I'd like to mention is your flexibility and creativity. As mentioned, you did not arrive under normal circumstances, and therefore the research plan we had originally set out to do, and consisted mainly of experimental studies, could not be fully carried out. You started with an online study of cross-cultural differences and became so interested in that you wanted to continue along this path and completely rewrote your PhD project. As a member of the experimental health psychology section, you discovered that you were actually not that interested in pain, and experimental studies did not seem so appealing to you anymore. However, after a lot of persuasion from Madelon and me, you agreed to do the laboratory study on optimism and placebo responding, which is included in your thesis, and luckily you liked it after all. The follow-up study has been set up and data collection is already complete. Secondly, your patience is another thing that stood out during your project, and you definitely needed it. While your very first manuscript was submitted after only 1 year, the review process took exactly 1 year and 8 months. Interestingly, this experience has probably made you the fastest reviewer in the world, because to prevent that others had to wait as long as you completed each task as a reviewer in a few days to a week. The next thing I would like to highlight is the fact that you went the extra mile on every aspect during your PhD journey. As I mentioned before, you engaged in super fast reviewing work, but you also did not hesitate to do complex programming, and you were also very interested in contributing to teaching, even though that was not part of your job description. You also fulfilled the role of secretary in our research group in an excellent way. Many PhD students feel the pressure to finish their PhD on time. And as a Chinese scholarship student, the clock ticks a little faster because even the defense has to take place within the 4 years of your stay. Interestingly, you did not feel pressured at all and succeeded in finalizing your dissertation well in time while working remotely on projects in China, maintaining a long-distance relationship with your girlfriend, socializing with your colleagues, and regularly attending the sports club alongside your PhD projects. You also literally went the extra mile by planning occasional trips. One of the highlights of your time here was definitely the visit from your girlfriend. You proudly showed her around Maastricht, attended a conference together in Innsbruck, and enjoyed traveling together to Brussels and Paris. You also planned a few other trips, but as every adventure has its bloopers, your PhD time was no different. Your very first trip was supposed to be to Giethoorn by bike, and Madelon warned you that it was a long trip, but you were confident as ever, and you embarked on the journey. But as it turned out, it was a long way, it started raining, and you ended up in Sittard. Then, when you planned a trip to London with some friends, unfortunately, the hotel in London cancelled your stay at the last minute, and you had to change your plans and went to Germany instead. And unfortunately, you didn't make it to London anymore, but last week, you did some last-minute sightseeing in Italy and Spain, visiting 4 cities in 1 week to make up for it. And while we're on the subject of bloopers, I must mention the time when you worked really hard to make your first poster, only to forget it on the train to the conference. That, however, never happened again. Last but not least, of course, I would like to applaud your qualities as a scientist. Even before you came to the Netherlands, you had collaborated on several publications. And Madelon and I immediately noticed that you had a lot of scientific insights. You threw yourself into all the steps of research, from designing a study to testing and analyzing the data, and you worked very independently on all your tasks, including writing long replies to complex reviewers' comments, and we had very fruitful discussions during our weekly meetings. It was a pleasure to see you grow, develop your own style of writing, and acquire more and more scientific knowledge and integrity. Your excellent dissertation and defense are just the icing on the cake of an extraordinary journey, and we congratulate you on the successful completion of this adventure. We would also like to take this opportunity to extend our congratulations to your family, who have supported you from afar throughout this project, and who must be very proud of you now. Also a special mention to your girlfriend, who was ever present and designed a beautiful cover of your thesis. We wish you all a wonderful reunion in China soon. It will be strange when you leave, and you will definitely be missed, but luckily we still have some data to work on together. When you heard that you were admitted to the Chinese scholarship program, you wrote in an email, I feel joyful, anxious, excited, and a little afraid. It will be a huge turning point in my life. And you probably were very, very right about that. And I hope that this will remain a beautiful memory and a start of many more beautiful things. Liyang, also on behalf of your promoter, Madelon, congratulations on this big achievement.
Dear Dr. Wu, now a doctor officially, I also would like to congratulate you, and also on behalf of this university, Maastricht University, I would like to congratulate you with the degree you have acquired today. And today did not happen in imagination. I think you acted upon your best possible self today. So that is wonderful. I would like to address a few things. I want to thank all the opponents today who are present here on site, but also the two people online, Professor Bolmeijer and Dr. Peerdeman, for being here today and to ask their interesting questions. And after this ceremony, there will be a reception at the Refter, and I would like everyone to already, after closing this meeting, to go there while we remain a little longer to take some pictures together with the screen. And then also Professor Bolmeijer and Dr. Peerdeman can also say something to you. So now I would like to close this academic ceremony. All right. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yes.